Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us for today's webinar, which is sponsored by USDA NIFA through the North Central IPM Center. My name is Will Fullwider. I'm the project manager here at the Organic and IPM Working Group, and will be hosting the webinar this afternoon. I'm also pleased to welcome our guest speaker, Gabe Brown, who will be speaking about his experience in regenerative agriculture in his talk titled From Dirt to Soil. Gabe is one of the pioneers of the current soil health movement, which focuses on the regeneration of our resources. Gabe, along with his wife Shelly and son Paul, own and operate a diversified 5,000-acre farm and ranch near Bismarck, North Dakota. Their ranch focuses on farming and ranching in nature's image. The Browns holistically integrate their grazing and no-till cropping systems, which include a wide variety of cash crops, multi-species cover crops, along with all-natural grass-finished beef and lamb. They also raise pastured laying hens, broilers, and swine. This diversity and integration has regenerated the natural resources on the ranch without the use of synthetic fertilizers, pesticides, and fungicides. His book, Dirt to Soil, One Family's Journey into Regenerative Agriculture, recounts his story and also serves as a primer for farmers, ranchers, and policymakers who want to better understand how one can boost the operations of an entire farm by putting the health of the soil above all else. First, we'll go into some logistics. Please make sure to use the question box on your screen to type questions for Gabe during his presentation. I will moderate the questions during the last 15 minutes of the webinar after Gabe's presentation. Also, this webinar is being recorded and will be available later on Organic IPM WG at wordpress.com. By attending today's webinar, you are eligible for one CCA continuing education unit in nutrient management. You must be present for the entire webinar to receive those points. If you're watching this webinar live, you will receive an email in the next few days with the webinar recording, a webinar evaluation, and a link to submit your CCA credentials to earn the one CCA CEU, if you have not already done so when you were initially registered. This form will also need to be filled out if you're attending the webinar over the phone. And now that we've taken these logistics taken care of, we will move on to a couple of announcements about our upcoming webinars. So we have 3 webinars left in our series, one in November coming up in a couple of weeks, one in December, and then one that has yet to be announced in February. The one in November will be with Lane Selman of the Culinary Breeding Network. She'll talk about her work creating a network of plant breeders, seed growers, farmers, produce buyers to improve quality in vegetables and grains for the restaurant industry. That will be on November 12th. And then on December 12th, we will have Gladys Zanatti of the Rodale Institute talk about her work evaluating the biological control of striped cucumber beetles. So please be sure to register for those webinars and listen in, as they're sure to be very interesting as well. And we will keep you updated with the details of the February webinar after those webinars as well. With that, I will pass it over to Gabe to begin in his presentation. So welcome, Gabe.
Thank you, Will. It's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon.
And I will pass you the presentation.
Okay, can you see that?
Yes, we can. Perfect.
Okay, here we go. Well, thank you, everyone. It's good to be with you this afternoon. I'm going to go through this rather rapidly because I have approximately 40 minutes and a lot to cover. So I always start out by asking everyone, what do we have in common? What does a farmer from Bismarck, North Dakota have in common with a farmer from Indiana or Texas or California? Well, that answer, of course, is soil. And the principles I'm going to share with you today, I feel are 100% confident in saying that these principles will work anywhere in the world where there's dry land production agriculture. So the question I asked farmers and ranchers as I go out and visit with them is, are you satisfied with your soils? This here is a picture of soil that I took when I was on a trip in California. And one of these beds was taken from the edge of a field. It was in perennial grass, no real management, driven over by tractors, maybe occasionally grazed by wildlife. Another ped was from a farmer who tilled every year, very little crop diversity, and no cover crops. And the third ped was from a farm that, although they did some tillage, they had a wide diversity of different cash and cover crops throughout the growing season. So I always ask the group, well, which is which? Well, the top ped was from the edge of the field. The middle ped was from the tilled field with diversity in cover crops. And the bottom ped was from the tilled field with low diversity, no cover crops. Now, you might say, well, that makes sense. But what's absolutely amazing is all three of these peds were taken within 100 feet of each other, and they're all the same soil type. So that shows us that something else is occurring to change these characteristics and the function of these soils. So one of the benefits of having a big mouth and traveling all over the country speaking is I get a lot of people, scientists, researchers who want to study what's happening on our ranch. And I always invite them to do so. Usually they get frustrated because we have too many variables to quantify occurring on our ranch. But I had a researcher a couple years ago who brought his team, and they wanted to see if management played a role in soil function. So they looked at 4 producers, all located in close proximity, same soil types. The first producer used a lot of tillage, but they did have a high amount of diversity in the crop rotation. They grew everything, as you can see: spring wheat, winter wheat, soybeans, peas, dry edible beans, sunflower, flax, barley, canola, alfalfa, and I'm probably missing a few things in there. No synthetics were used, but they did use organic soil amendments: rock phosphates, fish meal, kelp, those types of things. The only cover crops they used were the alfalfa, which they would plow down, and a bit of sweet clover. No livestock integration. Now, if you look at that soil, it's pretty indicative of a tilled system. You see the crusting on the soil surface. You see the horizontal breaking. I do want to mention that although we did not find any earthworms in that soil, there was a lot of above ground biodiversity. In other words, insects, pollinators, birds, etc. Okay, the second producer, they called themselves a no-tiller. They really did do some soil disturbance because they were using a point-type seeder to inject anhydrous ammonia. Low diversity there, though. Only spring wheat, flax, soybeans, with the exception of the year that this study was done, they had planted their entire field to spring wheat, and we had 3.5 inches of rain, 45 minutes, and it washed their spring wheat crop away, and they had to plant sunflowers. Use of anhydrous ammonia pretty much every year ahead of the wheat. Also insecticides and fungicides as needed. No cover crops, no livestock. And that's what that soil looked like. Now take a look at that for a minute, and then I'm just going to quickly back up and look at that. Okay, that's heavy tillage, multiple passes per year. Here's the only tillage is done by those points once per year. Aren't they eerily similar? You see the crusting on the soil surface. You see the horizontal breaking. There was no earthworms to be found and very little above ground biodiversity in this field. The third producer has been no-till for 20 plus years, medium diversity, but high amount of inputs. They grow corn, sunflowers, barley, soybeans, spring wheat, but heavy use of liquid and dry fertilizers, insecticides, fungicides, seed treatments, etc. no cover crops, no livestock integration. Now look at that soil. This probably was the most astounding thing to the researchers when they saw these soils. You can almost see the bulk density of that soil. It's like a brick. And it was also evident that no obvious earthworms, etc., in the soil, very little above ground biodiversity. Pretty startling for the fact that it was 20 plus years no-till. And the fourth producer was myself. We've been no-till since 1994. We have a large amount of diversity in both the cash crops. We occasionally do use a herbicide. We have a number of fields now that are 7 years of no herbicide at all. We have not used glyphosate for many years. We try and put cover crops in every field every year, either before the cash crop, along with it, or in the case of fall biennials after. And then we integrate livestock into as many of the cropland fields as possible. That's what our soils look like. And yes, I made sure they took a nice picture with some clover in the background there, but you can see the difference in the aggregation. Now, I don't know how familiar you are with the terms, but I wanted to mention the term water extractable organic carbon because that's the food that biology eats. So I think of it, I'm going to explain it this way: soil organic matter is the house, water extractable organic carbon is the food in the refrigerator in that house. So here's the measurements from those 4 fields. Pounds of N, P, and K in each of those 4 producers' fields. I want you to notice the top 3. There really isn't much difference between any of them. So then, if you look at the bottom one, that's my fields. I think it's important to note that this study was done 2 years ago, and I had not applied a pound of any synthetic or organic amendments since 2007. That was the last year. So I had 10 years of not applying anything, with the exception of what naturally fell out of the animals as they were grazing on those fields. You know, for years people told me, Gabe, we can see you can plant legumes and through rhizobia take nitrogen out of the atmosphere, but you're going to run out of phosphorus and potassium. And I just couldn't believe that, because we had highly productive prairie soils here in the northern plains prior to European settlements. What produced that tremendous amount of biomass? Well, obviously it's the biology in the soil making those nutrients available. So I also want to make the point that these are the same soil types on all 4 of these operations. And I tell people, if you give me management of those other farms and give me a period of time, I will get their nutrients right to the level I'm at. Because see, they have as much nutrients as I have in my soil, just that it's not available. They don't have the biology to make it available. So if we look at the column on the right, the water extractable organic carbon, you can see that I have 4 times as much food for the biology. If I have more food, I'm going to have more biological activity, and with that will come nutrient cycling. Now, if we look at organic matter percentages in those fields, there's no difference between the other 3 operations. Now, this particular field, when we measured it of mine, was 6.9%. I want to make note that in 1991, my organic matter levels on these fields were 1.7 to 1.9%. In other words, exactly where my neighbors are at today. Infiltration rate in inches per hour, there's no difference. They're all hovering around a half of an inch per hour. In 1991, my infiltration rate was exactly that, a half of an inch per hour. Now it's been documented at over 30 inches per hour. So what's holding these other producers back? Obviously, the first operation, it's the tillage. That heavy use of tillage is setting that backwards. The second operation, it's the low diversity. There's no diversity amongst the cash or cover crops in order to stimulate biology to cycle nutrients. The third operation, it's the high use of synthetics. Too much synthetic used is destroying mycorrhizal fungi, and it is negatively impacting water infiltration, soil aggregation, etc. So what about micronutrients? Now, I did not know the path God was going to take me on back in the early 90s, so I didn't do a baseline study of my micronutrients. But one person that did was Colin Seiss, and Colin worked with Dr. Christine Jones. And this is the percent increase in availability of all those listed micronutrients. On the left side of that tape measure is Colin's soil. On the right side is his brother's right across the fence. I've stood on both these fields and I've dug down with the shovel and looked at him, and it is that striking of a difference. But notice every single micronutrient that Colin measured increased in availability. Also increased carbon, increased water holding capacity, and changed his pH, all by moving down the regenerative cycle. So I'm part of a study now that is doing in-depth analysis as to the amount of carbon we're cycling. The gentleman on the left is Dr. John Norman, retired soil scientist from the University of Wisconsin. On the right, that's Shannon Gomes, who runs Cedar Basin Consulting. They came out to my place, and on 600, just over 600 acres of land, they took 300 soil samples at 4-foot depths over the last 2 years. And here's what Dr. Norman said. The first year after running 140 samples to 48 inches showed 92 tons of carbon per acre. Soil cores were well aggregated down to 48 inches. The A horizon topsoil reached a depth of 29 inches. Right across the road on a neighbor's field, 5 inches. I so wish I would have archived those soils back when I started to see, so I could see what we've done. But my father-in-law, who farmed this land before I did, was heavy tillage. He practiced a lot of what I call recreational tillage. And so there's no reason to believe that my A horizon was any deeper than that 5 inches back then. So on this shovel here, around the outside, that's my soils, and the ped laying in front center, that's neighbor's soils right across the road, same soil type. Fact of the matter is we can regenerate our soils, and it's our management or our stewardship that makes the difference. What I'm trying to impose on other farmers and ranchers is that every decision they make has both compounding and cascading effects. These can be either positive or negative. They're never neutral. But we need to realize before we go out and do some of these practices, what compounding or cascading effect are they going to have on our soils and on our resource? So fact of the matter is, your farm is a reflection of you. If we look at how nature functions the same basic way anywhere in the world where there's dry land, farming or production agriculture, or just natural ecosystems. Number one, nature always acts in context. Number two, there's no mechanical and there's limited chemical disturbance. Nature always tries to armor the soil surface. Nature cycles water very efficiently. In nature, there's living plant root networks, cycling nutrients via biology. And there's thousands upon thousands of years of research and development. So looking at these principles, many of you know and have heard that there's 5 of them. My partners and I added 6. That 6th one is context, because we really feel that many farmers and ranchers are farming and ranching out of context. They do not take their environment into account. I was 300 miles north of the Canadian border here this summer, and they were trying to grow soybeans up there. That's out of context. You know, we shouldn't be trying to grow corn in very arid environments such as eastern Montana or eastern Colorado, or for that matter, probably Bismarck, North Dakota. There's a financial context. We all have a certain amount of capital that we can use. There's community context, family through society. That'll all play a role. And then I honestly believe there's a spiritual context, you know, and we need to have faith in the creation. We have to understand that our context before we can make decisions. What is our context? And this context is different for every family, farm, or ranch. So the second principle, least amount of mechanical chemical disturbance possible. That's my father-in-law with his beloved disc, disking these fields here before he turned the farm over to me. And I could never understand that. I grew up in town, learned how to farm from my father-in-law. And in the spring of the year, we'd go out and till the fields. And he said, now we're just trying to dry it out so we can seed. But then come July, we were praying for rain. And I could never understand why we did that. Ray Archuleta put this slide together, and I really like it. This soil is naked, hungry, thirsty, and running a fever. And I see that so often, no matter where I travel. Here's a very good picture to illustrate that. A farmer took a forested area, the soil on your left, cleared part of it and farmed it monoculture soybeans tillage for 17 years. That's the same soil. Now remember back to those soil peds I showed you early on. It's the same soil, it's just different management, different stewardship. And if we look at that under a microscope, it's easy to see which of those soils will infiltrate more water, which will hold more soil life, which will cycle nutrients, obvious in that picture. Some data from North Dakota. You know, this is from soils 1960 versus 2014, 50% loss in the A horizon of those soils. Organic matter levels, 62% loss. And no matter where I travel all over the world, we see this. I tell people, I have the good fortune, I'm on hundreds of farms and ranches all over the world every year. I have never been on one, including my own, that's not degraded. We're all farming a degraded resource. Sustainability isn't good enough. We need to regenerate our soils. So there's a commonality amongst all tillage tools. I swiped this slide from Dr. Dwayne Beck. All tillage tools destroy soil structure. All tillage reduces water infiltration. All tillage reduces organic matter. And all tillage increases weeds. In 1994, that was the first no-till drill I bought. And I used it for many years before upgrading to a new one. We've been 100% zero till ever since. That picture I'm showing there, that field is seeded. Switching gears a little bit, I always ask people, who believes this? The amount of moisture one receives is irrelevant. Now here in the Northern Plains right now, a lot of people are fighting excess moisture. But we need to look in the mirror, and here's why. What is relevant is effective rainfall, and effective rainfall is the amount that can be infiltrated and stored in the soil. This is a picture of a farm nearby. This farmer is no-till with the exception of this low spot. Every fall they come out, and for 30 plus years they've been tilling up that low spot. In the spring of the year they'll get in and seed it, and then here's what you'll see. It's not able to infiltrate moisture. This is a photo I took off the front porch of my house June 15, 2009. Started raining at about 5:30 in the evening. We ended up with 13.6 inches in 22 hours, which is a lot for Barley County, North Dakota. That's a photo Jay Fear, our district conservationist, took the following day. Now, I'm a little embarrassed. There's a little bare soil there in the foreground, but I don't think it looks too bad for 13.6 inches of rain. Jay dug down in the soil, and this is what he found. Notice the aggregation, the pore spaces. I'm not going to say that we infiltrated every drop of rainfall, but we can. I mentioned how we could only infiltrate a half of an inch per hour when I started. Here's what the researchers found we can now infiltrate. So this is an inch of water, and the answer is 9 seconds. We can infiltrate an inch in 9 seconds, a second inch in 16 seconds, 2 inches in 25 seconds. If you have too much water, you need to increase your crop intensity to use more water. In other words, grow cover crops. Use more high water use crops. If you do not have enough water, you need to increase the water holding capacity. In other words, grow things. This is only going to happen with good soil aggregation and good structure. In order for that to happen, you must have high populations of mycorrhizal fungi. In 2003, I had the good fortune that Dr. Chris Nichols came to my ranch, and she said, Gabe, your soils will never become sustainable as long as high rates of synthetic fertilizers are used. So I did split trials for 4 years. We fertilized part of a field and then reduced the rate throughout the rest. All 4 years, the most profitable field, or part of the field, was where we did not use the synthetics. So we eliminated all synthetic fertility on our own land in 2008 and on our rented land in 2010. I noticed an immediate improvement in the aggregation of our soils. And why is that? It's because of mycorrhizal fungi. By removing the synthetics, it allowed mycorrhizal fungi to propagate. We could build soil aggregates then, and that is key to water infiltration. That, along with carbon, of course, is key to water holding capacity. When I first purchased this farm, we could hold less than 2 inches of water per foot of the soil profile. Now my organic matter levels are from 5.3 to 7.9%. I can easily hold a year or more worth of moisture in my soils. That builds resiliency. We just went through 2016, 17, and 18, 3 very, very dry years, less than 50% of normal precip here on our ranch. And yet, I never had to sell any livestock. We had plenty of forage. We produced profitable cash crops every year because of the resiliency we've built into our soils. This is Dr. David Johnson, New Mexico State University. Dr. Johnson set out to determine what's the most important thing to a new seedling of most species when that seedling germinates. In order to be relevant, it has to have a coefficient of 0.7. Well, look at nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, organic matter. None of those are really relevant to a new seedling. What Dr. Johnson found, the most relevant thing, was the fungal to bacterial ratio in the soil. So this is a group of pepper plants all seeded the same day. The numbers indicate the fungal to bacterial ratio. As we improve the fungal component in the soil, look what that does for that new seedling. Unfortunately, as I travel around working with clients, I often see fungal to bacterial ratios like this: 10 bacteria to every 1 fungal, way out of whack. That's negatively affecting farm and ranch profitability, productivity, and ecosystem function. A very good picture of mycorrhizal fungi with the roots, forming that symbiotic relationship with the roots of the pine seedling. Arbuscular mycorrhizal fungi also protect their host plants from pathogens and nematodes, so it helps with disease protection. Mycorrhizal fungi also have the ability to transfer organic forms of nitrogen via amino acids to the plants. All this works together to save producers dollars. Yet so often in production agriculture, we're not talking about things like this. I know of very few agronomists who talk to their customers about this. They need to. It's very important for their profitability. Ways to increase mycorrhizal fungi: reduce or eliminate chemicals, reduce or eliminate tillage, eliminate synthetic fertilizers, and living plant cover as long as possible. Yet look at what we're doing in production agriculture today. Everything antagonistic to that. Here's just a few of the mycorrhizal friendly species. This is a mix. I had purchased that tract of land, and one of the first things I'll do is go plant a high mycorrhizal mix on it. By using those diverse covers, we're increasing organic matter levels substantially. That adds up to a lot of nutrients available for the plants. And I just figured out, using the local prices, what 1% organic matters has about $731 with the NPK and sulfur in it. If we increase organic matter levels, that's going to increase profitability. Carbon is the key driver for the nutritional status of plants and therefore the mineral density in animals and people. Carbon is a key driver for soil moisture holding capacity. Soil carbon is a key driver for farm profit. Yet we see very few agronomists talking about that. This is a photo given to me by Michael Thompson in Kansas. Michael decided to move down the regenerative path, switch to no-till, diverse crop rotation, cover crops, animal integration, same soils, 3 years difference. That's absolutely amazing. And we're seeing that all over as people move down the regenerative path. Third principle, armor on the soil surface. This is one of my native paddocks. You know, how much bare soil are you going to see there? That's nature covering the soil. Yet here we are in production agriculture today, doing, as I said earlier, exactly what we should not be doing. And then we get this dysfunctional soil ecosystem crust, not allowing moisture to penetrate, not conducive to soil microbiology, of course, also have extremely hot temperatures. We were traveling through the Central Valley of California last year, took this photo. You know, unfortunately, that's where most of our produce is grown. That's consumed in the United States. How can we expect to have nutrient-dense food when we treat our soils like that? It's not just through tillage either. We got to realize if we're removing all the above ground biomass, in this case straw, or through grazing. Here's a photo we took in August of pasture in Wisconsin, completely bare, nothing growing. On your left there, that's my neighbor's pasture and left side of the fence. On the right is mine. Mine had already been grazed. Look at the difference there on soil armor. And that's simply management or stewardship that causes that. Here I am planting through residue. I used residue from the previous year's cover crop to armor the soil. Here's a close-up. That field is planted to corn. How much evaporation is I going to have? How about soil temperatures? It was a 90 plus degree day. We measured soil temps underneath the residue, 87. On bare soil, 107. What difference does that make? At 70 degrees, 100% of moisture can be used for growth. Once soil temps rise to 100 degrees, that plant shuts down. Moisture is lost to evaporation, transpiration. As we get much higher than that, we start seeing negative effects on soil biology, the very biology that'll cycle nutrients for us. Every farmer needs to know this. They need to pay attention to this. We make our living by growing things. Why wouldn't you be concerned about soil temperatures? Fourth principle is diversity. Now, many of you have seen these slides, but this really showed me the importance of diversity. In 2006, I heard Dr. Ademir Caligari speak, and he was talking about cover crops and how they should always be seeded as multi-species combinations. So I was on the Burleigh County Soil Conservation District Board of Supervisors. We decided we'd do some plot work. We'd plant these species as monocultures and then plant them as a diverse polyculture. Now it was very dry that year. We seeded in May into dry soils, less than an inch of moisture. Here's what the monoculture turnips look like July 31st. There's the oilseed radish. On down the line we went till you got to the diverse polyculture mix. Take a look at that. Yet we're told over and over again, oh, we got to plant monocultures. Really? Is that how nature functions? The staff clipped those plots 3 to 4 times as much production where we had the diversity. And Dr. Chris Nichols said it like this, and she's talking about mycorrhizal fungi. Not only do the fungi provide for the needs of one plant, but the fungal hyphae pipeline connect to multiple plants. This helps satisfy the nutritional and energy needs of both microorganisms and the plants. Give you another example. Here's some spring triticale. That crop looks pretty poor, right? Now it doesn't even pay to harvest that. How about this? Looks pretty good, right? Look at those heads. Now, some people might say, oh, but that's a tremendously weedy crop. Here's the amazing thing about those two photos. They're planted side by side on the same field. The only difference is diversity. I don't know how anybody can look at that photo there and not realize that monocultures are a detriment to soil health and ecosystem function. That's just striking. It's Dr. Yamili in the pink. She was in charge of this project. She lives in southwest Alberta. Monocultures are a detriment to soil health, and the sad thing is we've known that for some time. Here's work from Dr. Tillman, University of Minnesota. Plant biomass on the left, species diversity on the bottom. Look at that. As we increase species diversity, look what happens to biomass production right there. Now, it's not only species diversity, it's functional diversity. In other words, grasses, forbs, legumes, trees, shrubs. As we increase the number of functional groups, we're going to increase biomass production. Scientists have known this for some time. It's been in the ecology papers. Dr. Miguel Altieri, 1994. A key strategy in sustainable agriculture is to restore functional biodiversity of the agricultural landscape. Yet, what are we doing in production agriculture? Exactly the opposite. What are we doing by having this amount of diversity? We're optimizing solar energy collection. Look at all the different leaf sizes and shapes there. No matter how much sunlight is occurring that day, I'm going to intercept it before it hits the soil surface with that many leaf sizes, shapes, different plant heights. By doing so, I'm increasing photosynthetic capacity. Now, as I improve my soil health, I'm going to be able to increase photosynthetic rate, which will also improve the amount of carbon that I have cycling in my system. It's diversity that drives soil health. So when we purchased this farm from my in-laws, my father-in-law was growing wheat, barley, and a little bit of oats, but he didn't have any 3 of the other crop types. So this is the cash crops that we grow on our ranch today. Don't pay attention to them. They may or may not work for you. Just notice the diversity of them. And I'm not planting them as monocultures. In the upper left, that's oats with 3 types of clover. The lower left, that's corn with hairy vetch. The lower right is sunflowers with 20 different covers growing underneath it. The upper right is a diverse broadleaf forage crop. I put in just a few examples of what we're doing and how we're building resiliency to both our soil ecosystem and our pocketbook by having this diversity. So this is cereal rye, winter triticale, forage winter wheat, and hairy vetch, combinations thereof. From 2008 through 2018, this is my average net profit per acre. Now, I am selling this as seed, but you can tell that it's been very profitable for me. And so I get a lot of people saying, oh, I won't grow cereal rye or winter triticale because I got to grow wheat. Oh, really? Well, what's your net income from your wheat, for crying out loud? You know, maybe you should look at diversity. Here's my oats crop. No fertilizer, pesticides, fungicides under this particular field where this was grown. I got clover growing underneath there. Average net profit over a 10-year period, $482 an acre. The beautiful thing is we can combine off that oats as a monoculture and we have all that clover growing and then we can graze livestock on it. Here's my cost of production for these major crops for those 11 years. And what the point I'm trying to get across here is that by working with nature, it's made me a least cost producer. You know, corn at $1.41 a bushel, I can still make money even at today's prices. That's important. I want to say this too. We grow cash crops on 70 to 80% of our cropland acres every year. On those acres, we also grow a cover crop, either before the cash crop, along with it, or after. Now, the other 20 to 30% of our cropland acres, I'm double cropping cover crops, grazing it with livestock. One of the other things I've been doing for numerous years is I grow diverse polyculture cash crops. So this is oats, barley, peas, flax, and lentils, all seeded together, all combined together. And you might say, well, you can't separate that out. No, that's not my goal. We're using that as livestock feed in our hog and poultry rations and also as cover crop seed. If I did want to separate it out, it could be easily done if I just remove either the barley or oats. We could separate that if we so chose. I'm also working on developing open pollinated corn with low CRM. And this is because I am seeing benefits to feeding non-GMO grains. And there's a big demand for that. Also, we've lowered populations to where we're getting multiple ears on the corn, so that keeps seed costs down. It's been a slow process developing this because of our environment. I'm trying to get corn with relative maturity in the 75 to 79 day range. And just so it allows me more time to grow that cover crop underneath that canopy. This is a photo I just took a week ago. That's actually barley that was seeded in September. And this will be my third year now of seeding barley in the fall in North Dakota. And I've successfully gotten it to overwinter, and I've combined it the next July. And I look at that as a win-win for people in northern environments because of our limited moisture, especially here west. If we can develop varieties that can overwinter, again, ecological context. We get our moisture during the winter, early spring. Why not have something in the ground and growing? People told me, oh, you'll never get barley to overwinter. Yeah, we've done it 2 years in a row and combined it successfully with very good yields. I will take profit over yield any day, though. We've got to quit talking about yield in pounds in agriculture. We have to talk about profit and about restoring ecological function. Fifth principle, living root in the soil as long as possible throughout the year. This in the foreground is a oat, barley, pea, lentil, radish that I went in and seeded following a cash crop. Never pass up the opportunity to cycle carbon. As Ray Archuleta says, plant and soil are one. We grow a wide variety of different cover crops on our ranch. Don't pay attention to what we grow. Just realize we're growing them to address resource concerns. What's your resource concern on that field? Let's determine it, and then let's plant the cover crop that will address that resource concern. This is just one such mix. That's what the seed mix looked like. That's the diversity in that mix. I'm optimizing solar energy collection by doing so. We're building organic matter, cycling nutrients deep into the soil profile. We're feeding the whole. And this is one thing that's near and dear to me is I think we got to look at the whole ecosystem. When I first moved on this ranch, we had very little wildlife. Now this place, even though it's in jurisdiction of the city committee of Bismarck's jurisdiction, it's teeming with wildlife, both larger above ground animals and insects. And I really think insects are often overlooked and underappreciated in agriculture. Dr. Jonathan Lundgren told me for every insect species that's a pest, there are 1,700 that are beneficial or neutral. Yet why in agriculture do we just try and kill them? Here's 1 square meter in an Iowa cornfield. That's all the insects they found. Here's 1 square meter in native prairie. Look at the diversity. The reason producers have pest problems is because of lack of diversity. There's no home for the predator insects. How many farmers out there today bother to provide the habitat for the predator insects? I've planted some orchards on our place, and underneath those orchards, we have planted species that attract both predators and pollinators. That's one of my new orchards there. The trees are in tree tubes because of the deer pressure. You can see the sheep in the background there. We grass finished lambs in there. But look at the diversity in there. And it's diversity of not only forbs, but grass species. This attracts a tremendous amount of pollinators, and it also attracts predator insects such as lady beetles, hister beetles, rove beetles, dung beetles. Back in 2009, when we quit using all insecticides on our livestock, we never found a dung beetle species. Now we've got 17 different species we've documented on the ranch. This is saving us a tremendous amount of money, plus providing us an ecological service. Dragonflies, and we can show you pictures of just swarms of dragonflies. And here's orb weavers. You know how many flies are going to make it through that maze? I have not used a pesticide since before the turn of the century, with the exception of seed treatment on corn, and I discontinued that in 2010. There's absolutely no need for me to do so because the predator insects take care of the pests for us. Now, I had told you how I was in Central Valley of California, slammed the brakes on the vehicle when I saw this. Evidently, that's a California cover crop plot there. It was absolutely hilarious. There was actually 3 bees on that sunflower head. One of the other things we need to take into consideration that we haven't been is things such as rhizophagy. So Dr. James White has found that microbes actually enter the root tip of a plant, when they're inside the root of that plant, the nutrients are extracted, and then the microbes exit through the root hairs. And this is an actual photo of a root hair on a plant and the microbiology being exuded into the soil. Now, what's amazing there, I'll go back to this photo, he's also found that during the life cycle of that plant, the microorganisms will be able to move inside that plant up onto the seed, and then when that seed is dropped, carried away by wind or an animal, the biology is with that seed. Now think of what we're doing in production agriculture today. We're applying seed treatment, correct? We're killing the very thing that would help us make money. We've just gotten totally out of context in production agriculture today. Speeding it up a little bit to finish, the sixth principle is animal impact. You know, nature does not function without animals and insects. And so on our operation, we integrate livestock into our grazing systems, both cover crops and native range. Here, this group of grass finishers is grazing under an orchard. We have pastured pork. We have 1,400 laying hens out on pasture. And we convert these cover crops to dollars by grazing. I tell people I used to wake up every morning trying to decide what I was going to kill that day. A weed, a pest, a fungus, even with things as simple as seed treatment, I was killing things. Now I wake up every morning trying to decide how I can get more life on my farm. It is much more enjoyable and profitable working with life. On the left there, that's a photo of my cropland. On the right is the neighbor's cropland right across the road. It's not change that we are looking for, it's understanding, because only through understanding can change occur. We really have to understand the principles of nature, how ecosystems function. When we do so, we can make significant change to all of these things that we're talking. I don't care whether we're talking climate change, too much water, too much nitrates or phosphates in our watersheds, lack of water, or whether we're talking human health, nutrient density of foods. All these things can be addressed through regenerative agriculture. With that, Will, I'm ready for some questions.
Wow, I am impressed with your ability to fit that much information in at exactly the time. That was formidable for sure, and it was incredibly interesting. I'm sure everyone thought so as well. So yeah, everyone that would like to ask questions, please use the question boxes, and that'll pop up on my screen, and I will moderate those. We already have one that asks, have you looked at utilization of dew with diversity? So often we just talk about rain.
You know, that's a great question. Thank you for asking it. I will give you an example of that. And yes, that does play an important part in the resiliency of an ecosystem, especially in a drier climate. In 2013, I hosted a grass-fed exchange convention here on our ranch. And the day they toured our ranch, we had over 600 people touring. It was 108-degree actual air temperature. And the people walked into my cover crop, and they come out and their pants were just soaking wet. And now, obviously, you might think it's from the sweat, but no, it was from the dew being created in that very, very thick canopy of that living, diverse biology of all those plants. And so, yes, dew does play a tremendously important role in the water cycle, especially in our arid environments.
Great, thank you. Another one asks, does your production cost include the cost of labor? And if so, what do you use for labor cost?
Yes, it does. And what we use for labor costs right now is $25 per hour. That's what labor cost we're using. And that's the reason we use that figure. That's what we pay our hired man. So that's what we put in there.
Great, thank you. Here's another one. How has your relationship changed with your ag retailer? Is it trading fertilizer and pesticide purchases for cover crop seed purchases, for example?
That's a good question, and I tell people that one expense I have now that I never used to have is I have to buy my own caps because there's nobody coming up the road to give me a cap anymore, and I just don't buy a lot of um, those synthetics. We do buy cover crop seed. Obviously, I do, buy repairs locally and do as much business locally as I can. But it's a good day when here about 5, 6 years ago, my tax man called me, my accountant, and he says, Gabe, you've got problems. And I said, what's the problem? He says, well, you owe a lot of taxes. And I said, well, that's a good problem to have. And I don't mind paying taxes. So we just don't have a lot of the expenses that we used to have. Uh, and that's just the nature of regenerative farming.
All right, another one asks, is animal agriculture critical or is there an alternative way to get that nutrient cycling?
Here's what I tell people, okay? Nature does not function in its entirety without animals and insects. That does not mean that we have to have them. I understand there's many farmers out there that either A, don't want to have livestock, or B, are not able to because of their location, etc. We have 400 acres of land on our ranch that we're just not able to graze livestock on. It's surrounded by a housing development, and it's just not worth the headache to do so. We've advanced soils on those 400 acres to the point where we no longer use the synthetics, but those soils will never be as healthy as the soils where we're able to integrate animals. It's just like climbing a stairs. Every one of these things you do, whether it be no-till, crop diversity, cover crops, animal integration, will just take you a little further up that staircase.
Great, thank you. Another question asks, what herbicides are used on your farm? You noted no glyphosate, but curious what is used. How long have you been able to manage annual crop fields without herbicides applied?
Yeah, so as I mentioned early on, most of our fields are now 7 years with no herbicide, zero. Last year on my 5,000 acre ranch, my total herbicide bill was $19.95. So that isn't much, simply because I had one little patch where we were not able to get livestock to graze that just for the sake of the housing developments near it, I wanted to spray a patch of weeds. So which herbicides I use is totally dependent on the specific weed, or I prefer forb, that I'm trying to control. And so there's various ones, whether it be some form of 2,4-D is the most common. I'm going to try and use herbicides which have the smallest, shortest half-life and will break down the quickest.
Another asks, what are your yields compared to your neighbors?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and I should have put that slide in this presentation. So my yields compared to some of my neighbors are slightly lower, some of my neighbors much, much higher. Compared to county average, for instance, Burley County, North Dakota, average corn yield is just under 100 bushels per acre. My average corn yield is 127. Burley County average oat yield is 62 bushels per acre. Mine is 112. So there I'm 100% higher, almost, not quite, but close than county average. So people often ask me, well, how are we going to feed the world with this type of agriculture? I tell them, well, look at what I'm doing. I'm not only producing grains, which with a higher yield than county average, but I'm stacking all these other enterprises, beef, lamb, pork, chickens. We have a honey enterprise. I'm producing way more calories of nutrient-dense food per acre than is it anyone in the conventional model.
All right, great. So those are all the questions that I have in these chat boxes. Those that are on the phone are not able to ask questions. Oops, here we have one more in the chat box. What do you see as the future for ag retail if regenerative agriculture takes off?
Oh, I think the future for ag retail is great, just that I think it will change. I think it'll be more focused on providing those things that can advance ecological services. And for instance, cover crop sales, there's a real demand for cover crops. There's certainly a demand for fencing, electric fencing, for water development, watering systems. There's many things that can be done. I don't see any change in the equipment needs for harvesting. They'll although the specific equipment might change, there'll still be that demand. I see the negative impact mostly on the fertilizers, although that'll change to more organic type amendments. There'll be a change in the amount of herbicides that are used, and I'm sorry, so be it if that's the case. I think there'll be a real demand in the change of instrumentation to quantify these services as we move into being paid for carbon credits, being paid for water holding capacity and what we're doing for the water cycle. I just look at it as a shift. And that's been occurring all the time. You know, we've shifted away from the plow in most cases.
Great. And a couple more questions. How do you plant cover crops with such different seed sizes at the same time?
Yeah, and that I showed the picture of that cover crop seed, and it's very easy to do. I have a John Deere 1590 box drill, and people think, well, how does that work? All those different seed sizes and shapes. Well, the important thing is A, you get the seed in the soil. B, you get good seed soil contact. Today's equipment is able to do that. And when we're planting cover crops, we're not going out and planting 10,000 acres in a day. You know, we're doing 160 acres or something. And in that short of time, it's not going to settle out very much in the drill. And even if it does, it's a cover crop. Now, people worry about the small seed will get placed too deep and the larger seed too shallow. What we've found is you get it covered, good seed soil contact. The large seed will break away for the small seed. We have very good emergence. And I tell people, realize context. As you move down this path and improve soil aggregation, improve the function of your soil, it's very hard for me now to screw up bad enough where I don't get a stand anymore because of how well aggregated our soils are. So nature has a way of taking care of that.
Great, thank you. Last two questions for you. Is your weed control accomplished through residue, or do you have any cultivation whatsoever?
Okay, zero cultivation whatsoever. We have not. I won't even use trash row cleaners or trash whippers on our corn planter. That's too much tillage for me. So zero cultivation. What I do, again, it's about context. In my environment, my northern environment in North Dakota, we get winter. It kills about everything. That's a good thing. That terminates my cover crop. So we'll plant a cover crop during the late summer, let it grow, let winter terminate it. The snow lays it down. I go in and seed. You know, I can start with 2 to 3 inches of residue when I'm seeding, usually in late April, early May, and that'll give me enough weed control until that cash crop canopies. So we use it to our advantage. It's context. Now, those people further south that obviously want to use a crop roller to inhibit the weeds and to provide that armor that will inhibit weeds from germinating. And I just want to say, I am not saying that I have a weed, and I don't like the term weed, they're forbs. I don't have a forb-free farm. You come out here, you will see forbs and weeds. But the thing is, you have to realize the benefit they play to an ecosystem. I got a whole presentation I put together on different species of these forbs and the nutrients that they cycle. We're not using them to our advantage. They're there because a nutrient is needed in that soil, needs to be cycled. So one of the most profound things I ever heard was a gentleman by the name of Don Campbell from Alberta, a rancher, said, if you want to make small changes, change the way you do things. But if you want to make major changes, change the way you see things. A farmer sees a forb in a field, they think they have a weed and they want to spray it and go kill it. Gabe Brown sees a forb in a field and I think I have a plant that is there for a purpose, cycling a nutrient. And so I look at what nutrient is that plant trying to cycle, and I try and learn from it. We need to change the way we see things in production agriculture.
Great, thank you. And last question for you. What's the market like for the mixed seed you are harvesting from a single field? Are you using all of that with your own livestock, or can that be sold readily?
And that's a good question. People laugh at us because we're different. We laugh at them because they're all the same. Why in the world would I want to plant corn or wheat or soybeans when everyone and their mother is doing so? I'm going to plant. I read a book once about people who are very, very successful in business, and everyone two down said the same thing. They said too many people they manufacture or build something and then they go try and sell it. That's not the way to make money. The way to make money is to find where there's a need and then produce for it. So I showed my net income from my rye triticale vetch. How many people do you know out there that are doing it? Okay, probably only me. And I'm netting $951 an acre for the last 11 years on it. You know, yes, there's a readily market because there's a demand for it. Sometimes we have to change how we see things, see what there's a demand for, and then produce for it. Do you know when I get this barley variety bred up that's overwintering, can you imagine the demand I'm going to have for that? I already see the need for it because most farmers in the Northern Plains have a bit of time in the fall, not this fall, but most years, where they can get in and get something like that seeded. Do you know what that'll do for their workload in the spring? Okay. See, I'm seeing demands when other people don't. And so there's money to be made if we just, you know, we got to fight through the compaction between our ears and look at things differently.
Thank you so much, Gabe. I don't want to take up more of your time. Thank you so much for the presentation. It was illuminating, and I very much look forward to it. Thank you very much.
My pleasure, Will. Thank you.
Of course.
Have a good day, everyone.
All right. And so wrapping up, we have any questions or ideas, comments, or concerns for any about the presentation, or ideas for this February webinar that we have upcoming? Feel free to email me at wfullwider@ipminstitute.org, and look out for that follow-up email with the evaluation of the webinar, and as well as a link to apply for the continuing education credits. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.